of the Good Samaritan.
Hello, everybody. Who is the Good Samaritan really? I want you to keep that question in mind as we watch this powerful homily from Bishop Barron. In it, he offers an ancient symbolic interpretation of the parable, one that lines up with how the early church fathers understood the story. This is an amazing interpretation. It's not what you expect. And this video has over 100,000 views. It's an amazing video, and you can see it all in under 7 minutes. Check this out.
You know, if you go to France and to the great Cathedral of Chartres, about an hour south of Paris, you'll see a stained glass window that intertwines two stories: the story of the Good Samaritan and the story of the fall and redemption. You say, now why is that? Well, it represents an ancient interpretation of that famous parable, which certainly is all about our need to reach out to the poor and to those who are injured and marginalized and our neighbor, etc. And all that's true, but the church fathers saw an even deeper reading. This story is a metaphor of our story, of everybody in this room, the story of our fall and our redemption. So, how's it work? Well, look how the story opens. It says, a man went down from Jerusalem to Jericho. Now, what's Jerusalem in the Bible? Well, it's the city in Palestine, but Jerusalem is always symbolic of heaven. Mount Zion, true pole of the earth, all the tribes go up. The heavenly Jerusalem, right? The holy city. Jerusalem stands for the way we ought to be. What's Jericho? Well, throughout the Bible, it's the city of sin. Because remember, when the Israelites come into the promised land, they have to knock down the walls of Jericho. Remember poor Bartimaeus, the blind man, who's crouched by the walls of Jericho. It's a city of dysfunction, of sin. So, how does the story open? A man went down from Jerusalem to Jericho. It's everybody in this room. That's you and me, everyone. We're the men and women who've fallen from the way we ought to be to where we are. On the way, what happens to him? Well, he gets beaten within an inch of his life. And so he lies there helplessly. You know, it was just a little over a year ago, just before I was named a bishop out in LA, I was in the hospital. I had a appendicitis thing, and they had to go in and take the appendix out. But then things got complicated with bleeding, and I won't, believe me, give you all the gory details, but I had to have 2 surgeries. It was the first time ever in my life I'd spent a night in the hospital. And I was there, you know, those who've had serious surgery know what I'm talking about, lying in this bed, completely helpless. Someone could have come in and just killed me. I couldn't have even defended myself. I couldn't even sit up in bed. That's how helpless I felt. Or perhaps someone who's wrestled in this room with an addiction, or who has a loved one who's wrestled with an addiction, whether it's to pornography, it's to alcohol, to drugs, whatever it is. What's true of people that really wrestle with an addiction is they can't get themselves out of the trouble, right? So in those wonderful 12-step programs, they talk about hitting bottom. That's the way I felt physically over a year ago. Like I just hit bottom. I was totally helpless. And psychologically and spiritually, those who are in an addiction feel helpless. They can't lift themselves up out of this problem. Okay, fellow sinners, sin is like an addiction. Don't think of sin here as the little things that we do wrong. That's true. But the Bible uses the word sin the way I'm using it. It's like a condition. It's like a disease. It's like a addiction. It's a state we find ourselves in and we can't extricate ourselves from it. G.K. Chesterton, the great English Catholic writer, said, "We're all in the same boat and we're all seasick," right? That's sin. That's sin. So, who comes by on the road? Let's continue with this interpretation. Well, the priest and the Levite, they can't help this poor man. What do they symbolize? They symbolize, if you want, all of official religion of that time. All the rituals and practices of the religion of that time. Couldn't help him. Put it now in our context. Do we sometimes find ourselves saying, with just enough political reform, if we just kind of tweak things economically, if we just work on our psychology, we make things economically better, we'll be okay? The Bible says no to that. Nothing we can do, no work of ours, no institution of ours can save us from the problem of sin. In fact, when we try to save ourselves, we make things worse. It's like someone stuck in quicksand, right? The worst thing you can do is try on your own to get out. You just sink deeper. Well, who comes along? Who comes along? But this Samaritan, this outsider. So we know that for the Jews of Jesus' time, Samaritans were half-breeds. They were no good. They weren't true Israelites. Along comes a Samaritan who gets down off of his own beast of burden, stoops down, pours oil and wine into the wounds of the man, puts him up on his own beast of burden, takes him to an inn and cares for him. Who is he? Who is he? We'll go back to Chartres Cathedral, the weaving together of these two great stories. Who is the Good Samaritan but Christ? Look at him, please, on the cross. Outsider? You bet. Despised? Absolutely. But yet he's the one who stooped down. Paul said, though he was in the form of God, he did not deem equality with God a thing to be grasped at, but rather emptied himself and took the form of a slave, accepting even death on a cross. What is that cross? But the stooping low of the Good Samaritan Christ.
Who is the Good Samaritan? It is Christ himself. If you want to see how Bishop Barron ends this homily, the full video is in the description below. This is not the normal interpretation, and I think many people in the audience that day were wondering where he was going with this. But when you think about what Bishop Barron is saying and you think about Jesus Christ and his passion, it makes perfect sense. Most people read this story, the Good Samaritan story, as a moral tale. And I think, to be fair, it really is that. It teaches us to cross boundaries, to show mercy, to love our neighbor, even when our neighbor is a stranger or even an enemy. But what if this parable is doing more than teaching ethics? What if it's revealing the very heart of salvation story, of fall, redemption, restoration, and all of those things? That's exactly what the church fathers believed, and it's exactly what Bishop Barron is presenting within this homily. Their symbolic reading sees the man who was beaten, robbed, and left for dead, representing humanity, broken by sin, stripped of their dignity, abandoned in a world that often passes us by. The road from Jerusalem to Jericho, as Bishop Barron mentions, well, that's the descent from paradise to the fallen world, the journey every soul makes when it departs from God. The priests and the Levites, as Bishop Barron mentions, are those who walk past the suffering man, which symbolize the law and the temple, the religion and the established authority of the day. They're good and holy things, as we see in the Bible, great and good and holy things, but ultimately unable to heal the deep wound of sin. Jesus had to do that. They can diagnose, and they did, but they didn't point, they couldn't ultimately fulfill righteousness. They couldn't save. Then comes the Samaritan. He's unexpected, even offensive. To the Jewish audience of Jesus' day, Samaritans were outsiders, ethnically, religiously, politically. But in this outsider, the Father saw a picture of Christ himself. Despised and rejected by men, yet full of compassion, he comes near, binds our wounds, pours oil and wine, a beautiful image of the sacraments. And if you watch the full homily of Bishop Barron, you'll see this part. A beautiful image of the sacraments, baptism, and the Eucharist. He placed this man on his own beast, bearing the burdens of our weaknesses, and brings him into an inn, a figure of the church, where he pays the price in full and promises to return. In this reading, the parable is not just about what we must do, it's first about what Christ has done for us. And that changes everything. As I often say, Christianity is about Christ, and without Christ, there really is no Christianity. Because if Christ is the Good Samaritan, then we're not just called to imitate him, but we're called to receive him. Before we can go and do likewise, we first have to admit that we're the one lying in the ditch. That's not easy when you think about it. We like to think of ourselves as the hero of the story. We're not the ones that need saving, we are the one that saves. But in truth, we're the wounded one. We've been hurt, we hurt others. We've made the journey away from God, from Jerusalem to Jericho, and we need saving. When you see the passion of Jesus through this lens, the pieces fall into place, I think. He is the one who came to us when we couldn't come to him. He didn't just give us advice or a moral checklist, he gave us himself. He poured out his blood like wine and his spirit like oil. He bore the cross, took on our suffering, and gave us a place in the Father's house, in the inn. And what about the command at the end of the parable? Go and do likewise. That's not just Jesus saying, be a nice person. It's him saying, now that you have been rescued, become a rescuer yourself. Now that you have been caught like a fish on a hook, go and be a fisher of men. Love as I have loved you, in short. So, yes, we're still called to be good Samaritans, but only because Christ was the good Samaritan first. And that's the beauty of this interpretation. It doesn't throw away the moral lesson, that's crucial, but it's grounded in grace. Great Aquinas way of approaching the scripture as well, seeing how the moral aspect and then how it gets perfected in grace. It shifts the center of the story from us to him, meaning Jesus. And when that happens, even the hardest commands become possible because we can do it emulating him and with his spirit. Because we're not trying to love from our own strength. We're loving from the strength of the one who found us, healed us, and is coming back for us. Let that sink in today.